Well, welcome to Climate Courage. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name is David Coe.
And at the far end, you have me as usual, Richard Busolato. Welcome.
Well, welcome. We have got an incredible amount of information to get through today, and we know we're not going to be able to do it. So we're just going to go as deep and as wide as we possibly can. But before we start, I've had a very, very, very bad case of COVID this week. So if I disappear off screen for a bit, it's because I'm coughing, sneezing, or something else. It hasn't been a lot of fun. When was the last time you guys got COVID?
22. No, 23,
22.
sorry. 23.
Okay.
23. Yeah. Never tested positive in 2020, but fairly sure I had it, given what I felt like in the timing.
Right.
And in 23, it was not as severe, but then I tested positive. So I've had it twice, yes.
I got it twice, and I got it first time during 2020.
20.
Yeah, my wife works as a midwife, so she was working in a hospital, and she basically, hospitals at that time were the breeding ground in many ways. All of us
Right.
there, so all of us got it, and then I had it really bad. Had it in hospital. I ended up in hospital.
Oh.
It stayed on for a long time. All my muscles had all sorts of issues and everything, really peculiar. And then I got it last year again, and it all flared up.
Oh, wow.
It's remarkable how it just triggered a whole storm of kind of, immune and other kind of issues.
Yeah, right. Well, you don't want to be getting it again. It's my second time. It was worse than my first time. So that was kind of, I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. I thought it would go the other way around. And I'm vaxxed up to the hilt. So yeah, hopefully it'll avoid long COVID. But anyway, so if I disappear, that's why. So today we have a very special guest from the outback of Australia, and I met this lovely lady just over the weekend, and we were talking about the floods and the impact on the floods. And I said, Heather, would you be willing to come and join us on Climate Courage? And she said yes. So welcome to Heather Cameron, all the way from, outside of Burke. It's a town called Gundabooka. Is that how you say it?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Yes, actually an area. It's not a town. So
Okay.
Burke is my closest town. I'm 84 kilometres from my closest town.
Wow. Now, just so people know where you are, I decided to put a map in. Let me just get it up here. So this is where you are. So tell us, what's the because driving distance, not flying, what's the city that's closest to you?
Sydney actually is, although Brisbane's only an hour further. It's only because of the way that the roads are situated that they're not direct routes. Yeah, so it just takes a little bit longer to go to Brisbane. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're up near the Queensland border there, right?
Yeah, pretty close to the border. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I thought people might want to get a sense of where you're from, but
800 kilometres from Sydney.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay.
So
wow.
I'm also a country girl. It was only 300 kilometres to the closest city, but I think people don't always really appreciate how big Australia is, right?
Yeah, that's just phenomenal.
Yeah, and I suspect, going back to school here, I think it's also got to do with the projection of the global map, that actually we kind of underestimate the size of Australia. If we had done it in what is it called, cone projection rather than Mercator, it would have showed as bigger and more appropriately sized, because it's a big country. I mean, speaking to Australian friends and the distances, I think it's actually very similar to Canada in that sense, how people think about distances. It's like, oh, yeah, my son had an away game in hockey. It was 280 kilometers going. It's like, Jesus, I can be in Scotland here if I drive the distance.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. My musical activities used to be 300 kilometers away. Yeah, it's true. But Heather's also a coach, but she's also written, it's a series of books, and it's called Never Underestimate a Woman, and book 3 is about to come out. So do you want to just tell us a little bit more about your life and your books and what you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. Book 3 has actually been released now, and I ordered some when I was in Singapore just last week, and they've already arrived. They arrived yesterday, so very exciting. So my life has been challenging, and I started writing when I discovered it was a form of therapy. So I would journal every morning, and it was coming together so well that then I thought, if I shared my story, if I was vulnerable enough to share my story, perhaps it'll help and inspire others. So part 1 was released in 2023, November 23, and it didn't take long to reach Amazon #1 bestseller.
Nice.
Then part 2 was released, because it's a trilogy, so part 2 was released in February 2024, and now part 3 has been released just a week ago. So yeah, very exciting time. Yeah. So and there was some hard times there when I was writing. You don't really realise what you suppress, what you hold back. I came from a family inflicted by domestic violence, extremely violent father, and we weren't allowed to talk about it. I was one of 7 children, so I was the youngest of the 7 children. And my mum said people would look down upon us if we talked about it, so we were better not to speak about it. So I went through, my life for all of those years, and then I was in my later 40s when I started writing, and I didn't realise how good it was as a form of therapy. It was just like tapping on those keys was letting all that rubbish go. So it was so good. But I also have a really warped sense of humour, so I've put my crazy Australian outback humour in there as well. And I spent my first years, I left school at 16. I'd never read a full book, never mind ever thinking I'd ever be an author. I'd been pushed through the public system. It's not so great in Australia, sadly, that we don't learn a lot of stuff at school that we're going to use for the rest of our life. So I ended up teaching myself to read and started reading short stories. I worked in the shearing industry. I started off as a checkout chick in the supermarket, then went into the shearing industry. Was in a pretty toxic team. It was the ex-in-laws, and they weren't great to work for. So I would go off to my bedroom with a small dictionary, because there was no mobile phones in those days, and certainly no mobile service. And I would, just read Reader's Digest or little stories like that, or magazines, and look up the words that I didn't know. And that was how I taught myself to read better. So, after a lot of years, I was a good saver. I owned my first house when I was 18. So I bought a little dump of a house in the town that we were living in at the time. Oh, I jumped out for a moment. Sorry, I don't know what happened
still
there.
You're still here.
Okay. On my screen, I didn't see it. I was like, what? I was only just getting cranked up too. So sold that little shoebox of a house after we'd done it up a few years later. Didn't have it for many years. And that was the deposit on this farm. Banks were selling a lot of farmers up back in those days. The floor price had crashed out of with the wool. So wool prices were really bad. Livestock is always up and down. It is quite a gamble being a farmer if you're relying on livestock and wool for your income. And the bank, when we were trying to get a loan, the banks kept refusing us, and we went through a lot of banks in Dubbo, our biggest centre, and eventually one man that was the Commonwealth Development Bank at the time said, "Why do you want to be a farmer?" And he held up a big A4 piece of paper and said, "See all these people's names on there?" He said, "We're selling them up. They've all gone bust. Why would you want to be one of them? Or how do you think you're going to be able to survive when they can't, And I said, "Well, we're shearers. We've got an outside income and we don't intend to give that up. We're going to be shearing contracting." So, he lent us the money and bought the farm all those years ago. So that was in 1993. I've been here for 33 years. So I was pretty young when I bought my first farm. It's 64,000 acres, so it gives me something to do in my spare time. So got out of the shearing industry. We ended up going into the earth moving business. So it started with started small, of course, and then ended up with a really large earth moving business, large company. I was the director of that company. And it was in the Bowen Basin in Queensland, so right up in the guts of Queensland there in the coal area. We had a lot of machinery working up there. And I discovered that my husband at the time was living a double life. He had a couple of apartments that he put deposits on the Gold Coast. He had a nice Filipino woman over there and living a complete other life. So that was a terrible shock to me when I was here running the farm and trying to homeschool my kids and run the farm. So I went to battle. My mum ran to get away from the DV, and she moved to Sydney and put the 2 youngest in the school hostel, and me being the youngest. And I was only 12 when that sort of happened, and I want to break the cycle. I'm going to change things for women. I want to be the voice for women, and I'm going to fight for as long as it takes, because my kids deserve to grow up in their own home. So after 24 court hearings in the Parramatta Family Law Court in Sydney, I had to keep going that 800-kilometre journey every time I went to court. 3.5 years later, I finally saved the farm. So my children got to grow up in their own home. Yeah.
Nice.
And, it's been a big journey, a hard journey. But, as I said, I want to be a voice for other women to help and inspire others, that women shouldn't have to run. Why should we run and hide with our kiddies? And that was another awful part too. The ex, had sent messages saying he's coming to take the kids because he knew there'd be a bargaining tool. So then I've had this awful. So part 3, that's sort of part 1, part 2 wrapped up. Part 3 has been the challenge of trying to survive with very little income, and then a huge legal debt that I had to keep paying off. And the debt that I was left, he left me with an $8 million debt, the ex did. So I had to deal with receivers with that, work out what was company and what was partnership. And luckily, the farm was partnership, and that's what helped me save it. Plus, we had a lovely little Cessna 182 aeroplane, and I did all sorts of deviant things to save the plane because we owned it. And I managed to save it, and I got a court order to sell it, and that helped me fight as well. So, yeah. Nice. So, so a good success story there in part 2. But part 3, as I started to say, it was the challenge of surviving after that. Then what, So there's still bills coming in, there's still bills to be paid and debt to be paid off. So, yeah, it's really how I navigated my way through that. Got into a relationship with my new partner. Down to earth, easygoing bloke, which is great. His nickname is Popeye, and everybody knows him as Popeye, so you don't get much more Aussie outback than that. Helped him to navigate his way. He was going through a similar sort of situation, and helped him navigate his way as well. Wrote about that in part 3. And so really some tools and resources. And because I'd taken on in that last 10 years, it's been 11 years since the big drama that I had. And the last 10 years was really, how I came through that, all the learnings that I've done, all the trainings that I've fitted in, and how I've navigated my way through life, and now helping and inspiring others and coach other women and speak to ladies groups and all sorts of things now. So it's really, really good.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. Wonder Woman. I love
it. Powerful story. Very powerful.
Thank you.
Story.
All right, so it's worth buying the book, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Now,
the whole trilogy, part 1, 2, and 3.
And in fact, I suspect there's going to be like a 4, 5, 6 as well.
there could be, but I probably won't. I think people will be sick of hearing about me.
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think it's going to be like, what's going on now?
What's she up to now? Yeah. Maybe I'll put snippets.
Encourage other people to write their trilogies. But the other thing that obviously was happening at the same time is that while you're struggling with finance and all the other things, you're also struggling in a hostile environment that you can't rely on. So I know that there's been massive drought periods and all sorts of things going on for you as well. So it's not just, it's never linear, right? There's all these different things going on. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah, and so about a month. 2013 was the mega drought. Is that the year?
That was the mega drought, and that was when I made my grim discovery. 2013 was the hardest year I've ever had in my life, right. And I wrote about that in part 1, and part 2. Sorry, part 2, because part 1, was right from a little bit of my mum's history, because I decided to add that there for legacy reasons as well. And part 2. So I've spoke about, when I made the grim discovery and I was struggling with drought. I was driving a D10 bulldozer, pushing over trees to feed cattle, to keep them alive, and putting out salt licks with, carrying my kids around the paddock doing these farm jobs. My little girl was at school, but my little boy was on my lap in the bulldozer most of the time while we were feeding cattle. So it wasn't easy. It was a struggle, a massive struggle. Yeah. And, pulling animals out of the river that was drying up fast. So, and often you've got to shoot them and put them out of their misery. It's just awful because you can't make them stand up when their legs are gone to sleep, like cattle and stuff like that. So it's pretty gut-wrenching. You've got to have a pretty, strong outlook on life to manage as a farmer in these Western areas. But it is a wonderful lifestyle when we do get rain, when it is a good season. And, So I was managing with all of that as well as the massive battle too.
Yeah. So about a month ago, we saw that Queensland got hit with rains the size of Texas. And so that's the only way people can really get a sort of sense of the scale of Australia and what the outback really looks like. And it started north of you and sort of came down. So I just wanted to maybe just give an overview of what happened and sort of talk about what your experience was in those recent floods.
Yeah, there was really not the warning that it was coming either, you know, so it was really challenging. I work at the local, I like to do community stuff, so I actually donate my time at the local radio station once a week. It gives me something to do. And anyway, yeah, so you get my warped humour. But in any case, I really enjoy it. It's really good, and it is a great community thing to do. And even with the weather forecast and everything, no one predicted that amount of rain to be coming. And, you know, we all thought that we were in for a dry period and weren't expecting it at all. And then they got a massive dump up further in Queensland, and some of that was in our catchment area. So, you know, we're in a 12-inch annual rainfall where I am. And if we get our 12 inches, we're happy with that. But some years we'll only get 3 and other years we might get 17. It's just how it rolls. We never know. There is no annual rain season out here. It just rains when it does and doesn't when it doesn't. So you can't sort of bank on when your rain should come either. So anyway, all of this rain just came in and just dumped on Queensland. People lost their whole herds of cattle. It was shocking up further. Because they had no warning to get them out or to get them onto higher ground, they just drowned. It's just terrible. So there was dead animals everywhere for them. It was just shocking, you know, and their houses flooded and all sorts of terrible things. And there isn't a lot of, I don't feel anyway, a lot of government assistance in Australia. They send SES in to search and rescue, you know, to sort of get in and see what they can, but they really don't do a great job. I had actually got, when the floodwaters reached us here, because it came down from up north, our catchment area is around Augathella, and it comes all the way down through Charleville and Cunnamulla and then down past us here, and it comes into the Darling River down just before Louth and ends up out into the Menindee Lakes. But anyway, so when it got to here, I organised with my neighbours, got a 4-seater chopper, so my son and I went up with him and had a look to see what sheep and goats and stuff that we had stuck on islands and that, so we knew that we could, you know, perhaps get the boat in and feed them, which we've been doing. You know, so we at least had the warning, even though we still got 4 inches of rain out of that rain. It was over a week period, so it was steady rain, so it didn't cause too much havoc. Most of it soaked in. And then we had warning for the river coming, so we were able to get over, my partner and I got over on the 4-wheel bikes in the main big river paddock we got here and moved out all the sheep that were in that paddock before the water got there, because most of that paddock goes underwater. So the few that were left there, you know, still had food on the islands. Because we'd been in a drought, that was the hardest part for the Queenslanders as well. The cattle that did get themselves, and sheep that did get themselves onto higher ground through all of these areas, we were in a severe drought, so there was nothing growing on the island. So unless the water was deep enough to get a boat to, there was no way to get food to them. And then with the SES bringing the choppers in, bringing in the large bales of hay, that's what my neighbour was saying, has got a chopper. You know, we use a gyrocopter here. We get a local fella to come with the gyrocopter to help us muster. And we're on the ground with the 2-way radios, and he's like telling us left or right and how far to go, because we're crashing through scrub. You can't see what you got in front of you till you come out the other side. And he can see what's happening from above, so he's just guiding us through to put the mobs together, and that's how we muster every time we need to, whether it be, you know, sheep, cattle or goats. It's the same deal. And he was saying, well, you know, because the cattle and the livestock are scared of the choppers because they're used to being pushed around with them. Imagine, you know, a great big chopper coming in with a bale of hay. They're jumping out in the water, and some of them are drowning anyway because the choppers are frightening them. So it was just ugly, really, really horrible. Yeah. So some of those people, there was a lovely old man, there was a lovely old man up in Queensland that was interviewed, and I heard him speaking and saying, you know, he recovered from the 74 floods, but he's never going to live long enough to be able to recover from these ones.
Right. So
these losses.
The last number of livestock death I heard was 150,000. Do you know what the total number is?
No, and I don't think they'll really know for a long time, because until they can get into some of those areas are still terribly wet. I know this morning I went on my little tractor and I bogged it because the ground looked like it was dry. Right. So it's still bogged.
Yeah, but there's actually still water there as well, right?
Yes, yeah, and the areas that there's still water, well, they won't get an accurate number until, like I said, in these scrubby areas where there's a lot of timber, and even in the big open farms, some of those properties are, you know, a few 100,000 acres up there in Queensland. They're bigger scale than we are. So until they muster their stock in, they won't know what their losses are.
Right. Okay, and then the other thing we started talking about was the warning system. So I heard that in Queensland they've got weather warning monitors all over the country, but there's just basically this whole, because it's so huge, right? There's not enough technology monitoring the weather in that part of the country. But then you kind of think, well, I mean, BOM, the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, must have had some sense that there was this big event coming through and issued a warning. So, I mean, it sounds like there's a real systemic failing. And I know, I'm sure when people are on the ground, they're blaming. But is this potentially just we're just not prepared for what the new sort of era of climate that we're in? Do you think it's more that, or is it failure, or is it lots of different things? What do you think?
It's a lot of
Where's
different things.
Yeah.
It's a lot of different things, because they wouldn't be talking about a lot of back in the days, like there was no way of recording how big the floods were, or they didn't have height levels or anything like that. So I think it's happened before. It's not new. And when they talk about the 74 floods, these were bigger than those. But as I said, because of the recording, no one would know, if they'd been higher than that before. So it is failure for BOM that we should have had more warning. I mean, as I said, for us in New South Wales, at least we got the warning because we knew the river was coming, but the rest of Queensland didn't, and they should have. The farmers should have had some warning that sort of weather pattern was about to occur, because they could have got them to higher ground and got feed out on those higher areas before the rain hit.
Yeah,
because most people have some sort of hay stockpiled, or they can get access to hay. If they get a little bit of warning.
Yeah. All right. And so, what about the costs to the people across the area? What are we getting any indication of that yet?
Not really. No. There's always a lot of got broken promises from government, but don't really see it.
Yeah. Right. So it's lack of support. So obviously during the fires, we hear a lot about the local animals being killed just because they can't get away fast enough. Was Australia's natural sort of animals impacted as well, or were they able to get away from the floods?
No, they were impacted as well. Yeah, there was footage of like kangaroos tangled up in fences, dead, and that all over the place as well. Just terrible. Yeah.
I didn't see anything like that discussed. Did you, David or Richard? Did you see any of that sort of coverage?
No.
No, because during the fires, they like to show the koalas burning at the side of the road, but I didn't see any of the natural animals. Okay. From an Indigenous perspective, the First Nations people, do they have a view of what's happening from an environmental perspective that's maybe talking about this is been seen in history, or this is a new era of the climate? Have you come across anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of. No. Same, I guess, because they didn't have a way of recording. They're cave paintings to a degree, but I don't really know if they painted, water scenes or anything like that.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to see if we could know about that. All right. So, but when it comes to like the whole climate emergency, and I know that the Albanese government, I think a lot of them being re-elected was because the opposition was so too much sitting in the climate denial phase, and Australia's just getting slammed again and again and again by extreme weather events. So what are you hearing on the ground in the outback? Are people talking about climate change? Are they concerned? Are they fearful? What's the conversation that's happening sort of in the outback around the topic?
No, not a lot. It's easy, like you mentioned before, blame. So as far as flooding can go, that, a little bit, or perhaps it's because of climate change. And the same when we go into a severe drought, it's because of climate change. It's like, that's the go-to. That's what we can blame. Yeah.
Right. But people aren't, because when I go back to parts of the country that I grew up in, everyone tells me about how much it's changed over the last 20, 30 years since I've left, right? So people aren't really sort of having that conversation about what's going on in the global environment and what we need to do to change. It's not happening. Really.
What I have noticed in this area in the 33 years that I've had this farm is a lot of good country out here. National parks. So the government, I guess, is they own the national parks. So a lot of them are farmers because they're getting offered really good money to sell out to national parks. So a lot of farmers have done that. They've taken that option and gone, which is really sad because, quite a few of us are now saying, well, who's going to feed the country if we keep selling our land off to national parks and it gets closed up? There's only so many parks that we can have. And the sad part about national parks, I know that they're also good to have as well, but I don't think we need so many. They want them to be back to their native state. So they actually fill in the dams and they close off all the artesian water. Where the hell do they think the native animals are going to drink when they've been drinking at man-made wells and water holes for 200 odd years, and suddenly they're closing it all off? So they perish when it becomes a drought because they've been drinking there for a few hundred years. So they just curl up and die. It doesn't make sense. I just think that a lot of these people are sitting behind desks and they don't get out and really realise what's going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's always the case. So that conversation where the implementation at the local level is not happening, it's being dictated at the national level, right? And it's always the case. So the majority, when you say feeding the country, the majority of the people in your region are livestock farmers.
Yes, meat producers, more meat than anything. But there is still quite a lot of wool produced out here.
Yeah. So
and around Burke itself is cotton.
Yeah, but not agriculture, wheat, all those sort of things. So it's more.
No, we're too low a rainfall out this far. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So I mean, I kind of, when I was looking at the floods, I was sort of thinking, imagine if you had an extreme summer where it got so hot you lost a lot of your crop, your livestock because of the heat, and then you got the floods and you lost the rest of them because of the floods. I mean, my first message was to my sister and saying, stock up on meat, if because it's gonna cost a lot more. So the price of meat must have skyrocketed in Australia since these floods, right?
I'd imagine so. We produce our own, but it was only a couple of years ago when the livestock prices were shocking, and we had no guarantee, because unless you really got big numbers and you can lock in a contract with an abattoir or someone like Coles or Woolworths, which is our big shopping centres here. You don't have a guaranteed price. We send ours to an auction system in Dubbo, and that's what most people do. And, we were sending them down there not knowing what we were going to receive. So lambs at one point were down to $20 a head. Now, people go into a butcher shop or a supermarket and they can't even buy 6, loin cutlets for sort of $15. It's like, what the hell? The middleman is making all of that. The farmers, are still producing it at this ridiculous price. And so, I was fortunate enough to be able to hold on to them at that point. But then you've got to sell them, because as they grow older, they're worth less money. So then it becomes hogget or mutton, and that's not as worth as much as lamb because it's not as tender. So you still got to take less, but you'd hope that you're going to do better than $20 a head.
I think we're really failing when it comes to the farmers. And getting it right. So the farmers need to be part, like all types of farms, even down to local farmers. So in Bangalore, all the local guys they might have an acre, and they're producing fruit and veg, right? And they're just getting kicked out in these office buildings, or these apartments for tech workers are being built. So all of the water's being poisoned, the sewage system's ineffective. But the skill of farming, of growing food, is being pushed out and pushed out and pushed out, and eventually there's going to be no one left growing the food. And
exactly right.
But that we don't seem to be getting that. But all the way through to just taking care of the farmers, the struggle of the farmers.
And it's what
it's like in Australia.
Evident. Yeah, it's more and more evident, and I've written about that in part 3 actually of my books. Talking about farmers, and the suicide rate's pretty high with farmers. With hard times and things like that, and just the young people are not coming back to the land. The kids are choosing not to. They want their 9-to-5 job. They want to know that they're finished at the end of the day. Our day can be as long as we need it to be. I love the lifestyle. I'm not complaining by any means, because it's choice of a lifestyle for me, and I love it. And I'm going across to farm tourism, and I do retreats and other businesses now as well to help me manage throughout that. So it's about diversifying in any way that we can to stay on the land, but it shouldn't have to be.
Yeah. But it does open up, I think, the wider discussion what the fair price of food is. And we've been living in a well, as a Gen Xer, I've been living in an era of constantly declining food prices as a share of your consumption basket. When my parents grew up, food was probably 50% of the family outlay. And I think just around COVID is probably when we bottomed in the Western world, where I think food outlays were about 10% of a family spend. And now it's picking up because some of the staples have become a lot more expensive in these last 5 years or so. I'm kind of puzzled why we would expect on average to only spend 10% on our most essential intake. And to some extent, the same goes for energy, that it's seen as good for the common to have really low energy prices and really low food prices, because then we have all this money to spend on other discretionary items. To me, it's kind of an alien thought that what we really, really need to appreciate it needs to bring in a fair price. That way you actually appreciate what matters most to families in the consumption basket. Because without food and energy, we have no life.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we have policymakers who are doing their utmost at every point in time to trying to suppress those prices to the absolute minimum.
I think
for me, it's an alien thought, right? Ultimately, what it does bring, in my mind, is that you see it as contemptuous. I expect my energy to be free. I expect to pay nothing for staples in the supermarket because it should basically be free. It's things I need, and things I need should be free. To me, it should be exactly the opposite.
I'm reminded, I don't know if you saw Interstellar. I find it a brilliant film. You know, it's kind of like lots of kind of physics gone cool.
Right, okay.
But the film starts with this thing, which, you know, this quote about how the world doesn't need any more engineers. You know, how I didn't run out of planes and TVs and kind of phones and stuff. They ran out of food. You know, the world needs farmers and good farmers. And I think that's kind of like what Richard's describing. There's this part where, and in many ways, you know, the whole thing, the whole broader aspect about how we have an unsustainable situation in pretty much everywhere that you want to look at, has to do with that, exactly as you say. You know, the ideas of sustainability are written from desks miles away from where the animals need to drink.
Exactly. Yeah.
And until we get reconnected, it's not going to get it right.
So I just want to add another thing before we hand it back to Heather. So, you know, the cocoa producer in Africa has it's been ground down. The price has been ground down and down and down and down, so they can't live a good life. You know, coffee, you name it, right? You look right across the world. The person who is growing the produce from the earth is not able to live a good life so that we can get something cheaper at the other end. And I think that's a model that needs to flip. Everyone who creates the food that nourishes us should be able to earn enough money to have a decent living standard. And that's where I think our capitalism has failed us.
Definitely.
Yes. I think it's kind of the failure of see the totality of what it brings, because ultimately, and again, I can draw the parallel to energy production with food production. If we expect certain standards to be kept, you know, I don't want to eat tomatoes full of pesticides, even though they might keep the bugs off or whatever. It's going to cost more. And I'm prepared to pay more because I really enjoy my tomatoes. You know, it's the staple food of this household are tomatoes. If you expect the producer of those tomatoes or the producer of natural gas or hydropower to come up with a price that is effectively at the bottom, they're going to cut corners. They're going to do things that are not exactly great, because that's the only way they can create an economics around the area. So you are going to get much more scandals around food production, that people are doing crazy things. And immediately, obviously, in the UK, mad cow disease comes to mind, right? Who on earth ever thought it was a good idea to bring herbivores into becoming carnivores? That's like, it's not in their DNA. And it's going to be the same with our energy consumption, right? If I can't meet that price, I'm going to put up wind towers, and I'm going to be mining for coal and natural gas in ways that are really crazy, because it's the only way I can survive financially. And then you eventually reap the cost of those really bad practices down the road. And the failure of today's capitalism to capture the true cost, because the future actually has no value in that economic model, is a failure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so let's hand it back to Heather. David or Richard, have you got any questions?
Oh,
you're speaking to an outback farmer for the first time, so.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'd love to be there. I'd love to try and think about, if ever there's a chance to visit, I'd love to do that.
There certainly is. Well, I've got the retreat out here, so I have 4 beautiful little cabins that I've set up along the edge of the river. So that's how much I've been able to turn our lives around.
Yeah. I mean,
it's through diversifying.
When people listen to how that amazing transformation, from kind of your childhood to where you are, going through all the things in between, what keeps you going? At some point you must have thought, sod this, kind of curling up somewhere is better than trying to keep going or whatever.
I think, good question. My kids were my driver for a long time. I wanted my kids to, obviously we want better for our kids than we had ourselves generally. So I wanted them to have a better life, and I wanted to be the role model for them. So my kids for a long time, and I was a late starter. So my daughter's 18 and my son is 16. So he's still at boarding school in Dubbo, which is only 5 hours. Only 5 hours. That's close for us. That's our closest bigger centre. Yeah. And my daughter's now going to uni in Wagga Wagga, and I've written about her story as well, and a bit about my son, of course, in part 3, because her journey is amazing too. She just blows me away, that girl. I don't know where she came from, but oh mate, she's something else. And I know my boy will be too, So she's a little entrepreneur herself. So my kids have I've just wanted to be the best model for them, to answer that question.
Yeah. So when you look at people who are just sort of down in the doldrums, and there's a lot of people who are really struggling just to survive in these times, mental health's a big issue. People are just struggling with despair. You were talking about the high suicide rates for farmers and that sort of thing. Because, my first impression of you were just one of those lights in a room. You could just see it in your face. You're just one of those people. It's true. What's your advice to people to step out of that despair and to step into the light? What do you think are the keys?
The keys is definitely, people freak out because we have the universal fears, the fear of not belonging, the fear of not being enough, and the fear of not being loved. And people are fearful of so many things. It's probably in the belonging field more than anything. And they're fearful of stepping out of their comfort zone. And that's where the growth comes from. So we really need to, when you feel uncomfortable in a situation, keep going, because we're not going to improve if we don't. If we just, how did a baby learn to walk? It was uncomfortable. They fell over, they hurt themselves. They kept getting up and they just kept going until they mastered it. We've got to be that baby. We've just got to keep pushing ourselves along. And be kind to yourself at the same time.
Yeah. I would say the other path out of fear and despair is action. That's
taking action. Definitely.
Yeah, go and do to change something. If you're not happy with the situation, go and change it.
Yeah, and as I said, with the comfort, you've got to push yourself out of your comfort zone. You're never going to change if you stay in your comfort zone. You really, if you feel uncomfortable because you're doing something you've never done before, you just got to keep keep going at it, keep chipping away, and you'll master it, and then do something else. Just keep, being your best, your own cheerleader. Really, you can't expect other people to come to the rescue. You've got to be your own rescuer.
So I can't help but think, like everyone's going to be in discomfort from now on, right? Because nothing's going to stay the same. So getting used to being uncomfortable is not a bad strategy. I know exactly what you're talking about. It's the only place where you grow, but just being used to being uncomfortable, because comfort has gone, and or will go. So let's just wrap up the story of the floods, right? So I know that there's a lot of areas still underwater. When you sort of look at your community and everyone's talking, and what's the message of the future? Are people just basically giving up, walking away, selling their farms? Obviously, the government's looking at reforestation, but is there a future energy in the community, or is there maybe it's time to adapt, change, do something different? What's going on there?
I don't know if I could answer for everybody there. I think each person's got to take their own journey. And as I'd said before, diversification appears to be the only way to go. So there is other ways of earning income streams, and they certainly need to be looking into that. I know we've got Climate Friendly and Green Collar out this way that do carbon projects, and I actually started a smaller project with them. I didn't want to put the whole place under, because there's parts of it that I want to pasture improve and bring back to its original state, what it was years ago. My mum grew up out this way, so she knew what the land used to look like, and then we had an invasion of woody weeds, so it just sort of crept in over the years. And I believe that is a result of white man, really, because we stopped bushfires. Back in the days, the Aboriginal people would start the bushfires to bring the grass so that animals would come to the sweet grass. And then white men came along and said, bushfires are devastating, they do bad for the country. Well, anyone knows that the ash is actually good for the soil. So Green Collar's come along now, and they're they call it ACCUs, so they actually pay us for locking up areas of our farms if we go into one of these projects. And that's something that I've, as I said, looking at what else can I do. I had to keep brainstorming how else can I survive, and that was one of the ways I was like, well, that's how I can survive, and not only survive, thrive, because they're only a 10-year project. They only pay you for 10 years. Some of the farmers are buying new four-wheel drives and having a fat old time, but 10 years is going to run out, and then what? So I've said, well, I've always envisioned or visualized creating a retreat, having a holiday home, a farm stay out here. So I looked into that and invested in 4 little cabins and set them up on the Warrego River out here, and we've put a lovely big community kitchen up there as well over the last few years, just from this the payments that come in. So I've invested into that, and it's not earning me any income yet. It's going to take years to pay it off, but at least when the carbon project runs out, I've got a backup plan already implemented. Yeah, and that gives me time to market it and get known and get tourists coming in.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, David, Richard, any final questions before we move on to the next topic?
I think it's fascinating, and I think, dare I say it, you're a prime example of what David, because he really is at the forefront, I think, of this thinking, is that the only way we move forward is through experimentation. It's like, we see if this works. Let's try some of that and see how it pans out. And if it doesn't, I am not so invested I cannot retrace my steps and go in a different direction. And personally, I think that's kind of how we evolved through life, is that you burn your fingers every now and then, and it's like, okay, that wasn't great, but I know I'll heal. I'm not going to risk so much that I can't recover.
Yeah,
that's basically,
fail forward.
Yeah, it's kind of very conceptualized in my mind that you cannot run the risk of being mortally wounded by what you do. Then you have a wrong perspective of risk. You do it in small steps, and this was really good. Now I can do more next time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think, my challenge is, how do I persuade my wife that we should get out there into the outback or the retreat? That's the first part. So I'm going to have to do that. My daughter is actually visiting Australia in a few weeks, but she's going to sort of Sydney and not in the outback. But maybe I can suggest.
It's only a couple of flights and you're here.
Yeah, exactly. It's only 800 kilometers.
You can fly out to Dubbo, and that's only an hour. Well, it's actually 50 minutes from Sydney to Dubbo. and then you change over to Airlink from either Qantas or Rex from Sydney, then change over to Airlink and fly out to Burke, and it's only an hour's drive. We go in and pick our guests up.
Okay. Well,
simple as that. 3 hours you're here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
get to see the real outback. Got a little buggy, can tour you around. My partner's a good tour guide.
Yeah. I think
crack a beer open for you at the end of the day.
It's so beautiful out there, right? The color, the colors and the smells,
Yeah. I just love where I live, and there is, as we've already discussed, hard times with droughts and floods, but generally the floods are good if they're not too major. Because a lot of feed comes after the flood. If it's not on the ground too long and it moves off fairly quickly, all the good feed comes up, and then you've got beautiful pasture to last for a long time then after the flood. So, you got to take the bad with the good, and I look for the good. I look for the good in everything. So, that's how I like to roll. Yeah.
It's a true example of resilience, an outback farmer or just an Australian farmer in general. It's always about, it's at the core because there's no certainty, right?
Yeah.
And
is this Lower Lila retreat?
Yep, that's me.
That's the one.
Yeah.
I'm looking it up.
See you when you get here.
But going back to what you're saying, I mean, I think this part where we've always been saying, I've always been saying, and especially in my mind to kind of young people and young professionals, as in, the ones who feel they have to stay in the desk and work and make the world better in many ways, is this part that it's not enough to survive. You got to, what we want to do is thrive.
Yeah.
So and that's one of the things that you're saying, and if you go back and you sort of think, well, why do you do this? Why do you have to have faith about what you're doing and keep doing? Is because you in many ways, I what I want to say is, if to sort of the 20 to 35-year-olds out there, in a way, maybe 40 even, or down or definitely down to the 15 and youngers, is that if you feel your parents have somehow let you down, that what should give you that faith to go forward is that you can not be that parent, but the other parent that you want. And that's why you keep striving forward in that way, which is what you were kind of saying in that way. I think that's so important. So, and the other part to what Richard's describing, what you're saying is, if you're going to do something and you bet your farm on it, then you're going to lose your farm. It's got to be smart about this. It's not about how you never know what's going to happen. So even if you're absolutely right, you never know what's going to happen. So the chances are something is going to knock you out. And I think the last bit that I get from you is very much that in this world where the world is just changing along, your worst enemy is your comfort zone.
Yes. Yeah. What's going on in your head is your worst enemy. If you over listen or you overthink.
Yeah, I'm certainly guilty of that. But
although I have discovered that there's about 20% of the population do not sit inside their head.
What?
It's not everyone. So, yeah, I know. David, are you a head talker? I can imagine you might not be.
I don't know what I am. I tend to think best when I'm walking along, and I tend to forget what I thought. It tends to be a case, oh, that's a great idea, and then I tend to forget it, and then I think, damn, I wish I'd written that down or something. Yeah,
no, that's what I mean. I mean, thoughts in your head that are critical of yourself. So you're your biggest critic. So Richard, you might not actually do this either.
Yeah,
no, because women are really common with their head talk. Men are too, but it's not as high. But it's interesting because Heather, that's something I've been interested in for a long time, because I'm just like, I've always had this head, just self-criticism, and it's like I've had to learn how to control it, and then I discovered other people didn't even have it, and I was like, wow, that must be amazing, going through the world without yourself telling yourself how shit you are all the time, right?
That, Andrea, can be conditioning too, though. If we've heard our parents, or I used to hear my mother criticize herself all the time. I never, ever heard my mum say anything she liked about herself. You know, she'd be like, oh, I hate my knobbly knees. I don't like my big nose. I hate my big tummy. And never anything nice. Never that, oh, you know, gee, I've got a nice smile. Oh, I love the way that, you know, I can look good when I put on a pretty dress, or never anything nice. Yeah.
But the people who don't have that issue in their mind, they find it very confusing when people who do have it talk about it. So it's just a really interesting part of humanity. So I thought you might enjoy that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, because we don't always know. We often presume that everyone must be the same because I am, so therefore you are, and it's like, no, you're not. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Like, because when Richard agreed, I'm like, I can't imagine Richard would do that to himself. He just doesn't strike me that way. But anyway, hope. Let's move on to hope. So there's an article, it's called Beyond Hope, and it's in the Minority Report. So Heather, do you want to stay with us for a while? Or
I'll stay with you for a little while.
Yeah,
if that's okay. Cool. Yeah.
And it's in the on another one on Substack called the Minority Report. And it really, every time I see an article on hope when it comes to the climate, I always read it because I want to know what the perspective is. Because people get really angry with you if they feel that you don't leave them with hope when you talk about what's going on in the environment, right? The planetary crisis, the bigger picture. So, which to me isn't just extreme weather events, it's microplastics, forever chemicals, it's biodiversity, ecosystem collapse. It's all of these different things. Some are going to take decades to fix, some are going to take hundreds of years, some are going to take thousands of years. So when I talk about the complexity of it and the fact that we're not doing anything about it, and people say to me, oh, you've got to leave us with hope. I'm like, I can't leave people with hope because it doesn't feel like, well, it's disingenuous for me because if nothing's changing, I know that there is no hope. But if we start to change, we might be able to put a bit of hope into the mix, but hope isn't right. Because the only thing that matters is action. So I don't know, David or Richard, are you having the hope conversations?
I don't see it as hope. I see it as faith, and there's a big difference.
Yeah.
You know, faith allows you, and you know, this is think of it as just, you know, without getting into too far into sort of, you know, the Pope and all that sort of faith in that way. Just think of that as saying, the faith that you can be that, you know, that parent you'd like to be or whatever it is different from the hope that you can be that. Even if you just say that, it says differently. Because hope is always something that somehow you wish it would happen. Faith is somehow something that's already present. And hope is always something that's kind of further in the future. So you can only thrive now. You can't think about, you know, what I would do in the future to thrive, and you thrive in knowing that you're taking the actions to ensure that you thrive. Hope leaves it very much to someone else to do it for you.
Yeah. There's it's a disempowering sort of word. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
When you're mired, it can leave you stuck, hoping someone will come.
Yeah.
Whereas faith is about how I can get myself forward.
Yeah, I think that's an important
distinction.
Yeah, it's a really important difference there. And I like the disempowering bit because, you know, myself, essentially, I've been conditioned to remove hope as a variable. When you played sports, there's no point hoping we're going to get, you know, a free kick outside the penalty area. I need to engineer getting a free kick there. When you, as I did, I've basically been trading my whole life in financial markets. Hope is your worst enemy. It's what clouds your rational judgment. When you're sitting hoping the market will go up or down, it's like you should already be out of this trade because it's a really, really bad trade. So you become conditioned to remove hope as something you even think or relate to in any shape or form because it's a bad thing. Hope is a really bad thing. It clouds your rational judgment. While faith is different. That is something you can almost lean back on. It's got your back. While hope does not have your back. It's just an illusion that somehow miraculously things will turn around in markets, for example. I've been very conditioned to suppress it my whole life as a variable, while faith is different.
Yeah, right. Heather, do you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I use trust. Throw another one in the mix.
Yeah.
That you trust that they will take action, that you trust that it will change. Yeah, and choice.
Yeah, so when people say to me, Andrew, you're not giving me any hope. So people cannot even talk about this stuff. Even though I don't talk about it negatively, I talk about it practically. And I talk about what we need to do, which is complete systems change, right? And then they still, well, you haven't given me any hope. I'm like, well, I honestly, we're not talking about one thing here. We're talking about multiple layers of change, right?
I like to sort of bring something to that. I came across this thing kind of from another Australian off the internet, and it's about kind of body and joints and getting your body moving well and so on. And it's really good. I can tell people what it is another time, but I won't want to mention that. But in there is this part in it. It's got these exercises and stuff, and obviously they're challenging, they're difficult, and it's kind of like it's going to hurt a bit and stuff. And the lady in there sort of makes this comment along that says, "Yeah, it's difficult and all the rest, but you got to start somewhere." And that's the difference between the people who says you got to leave me something with hope. Is the answer to that back is you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
You're not going to get any hope if you don't start somewhere. Just saying you got to leave me with hope is to say somehow the thing's going to turn around without you having to start somewhere.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. Someone the other day I was talking to, they said they'd flown to this event that we were at, and they just basically said to me, it's hard to believe that me not getting on a plane is going to make any difference when I know 10 million more people from India are going to get on a plane this year than were on a plane last year, right? And they're absolutely right, because that is the scale of growth that is happening in this region. The new middle class regions, countries, right? They're spending more and they're doing more. We're seeing it. The tourist overruns all across the world, from nations all across the world. Anyway, when I first started traveling, you could be in a beautiful place, Venice, and there'd be no one else around. Now you can't even get to the steps or any of the famous places, right? So the whole world is overrun with humanity that's got money to spend. And so people are saying, well, me stopping isn't going to make a difference. So I made a conscious decision to stop a few years ago and only get on planes if I absolutely have to, or if I'm going to make a massively positive contribution towards a lot of people that could drive change, right? That's why I get on a plane. But if we all just go, if I do it and there's all this happening, I'm not going to make a difference. And it's like, no, you're kind of missing the point. Once you embody change and you actually understand what you need to embody for this future that we need to build together, the birthing of a new world, you will inspire others and that will ripple out, and we need to do it quickly now.
Yeah.
When Richard and I wrote our book, The Unsustainable Truth, and we were trying to explore. So where for Heather's information, Richard and I came from 30 years making money for big money, basically. And we spent the last few of those researching into sustainability to form a sustainable policy for a hedge fund we were working on. And we really came up with lots of great ideas of how to make a lot of money. And many of those other people have done since, and we've seen it along. And they work, they make a lot of money, but we didn't do any of those because we realized they don't make the world sustainable. They make it worse. So this is very much kind of in line with what Heather was going on. We ended up leaving the industry and circumstances like COVID and other things come along. But actually, when you leave, there are two things that makes you change. One is necessity. You change because there's necessity to do so. It's very hard to sort of say don't. And the other is actually something that drives you, because you don't know necessarily where to go, but something that drives you along. And as you were describing, this part where you felt, I can be better for my children than what my parents were for me in that way. I think that's really important along. And they can be very simple kind of things that drives you. You can express it very simply. It doesn't need layers and layers kind of stuff. The things that requires layers and layers of stuff, and this goes back to when we were researching along, we started asking, what does it mean to be good, try and do good and all the rest. And one of the places we landed on was in Texas. There is a business school, Macomb School of Business, and they have this part in there about ethics unwrapped. And they talk a lot about rationalization, the different types of rationalization. And I remember very much this video of this, young lady talking about how she can rationalize anything. It's like her superpower. And this aspect to say there are 10,000 Indians who are going to fly more. So what does it mean for me to fly? Is one of those rationalizations, because it makes it your action dependent on an outcome you can be sure of. If you take actions where the outcomes are things that you can be sure of, then the world will never change, because the only thing you will do are the things that exist in that way. I'm sure, Heather, you must have felt along the way, I don't know what's going to happen out of doing this.
Absolutely. There was a lot of times when I didn't know what would happen, what the outcome would be, but I just refused to give up.
And that's the part. That's the answer to those things. If you only do the things you know will happen, you never do anything. You'll be stuck in your comfort zone. And then what you'll find is that the world will have moved on. You're like the wildebeest that refuse to migrate. You're left standing in this dried up water hole all by yourself.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
I refused to migrate, but I knew that the good season would come again.
Yeah, exactly, right.
But you're migrating in your mind, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's not always physical. I like that. So one of the things that was really coming through in this article is, no matter what, there can be no guilt. Guilt is negative. So when people say to me, why aren't you doing this? And I'll explain to them. If they're continuing to do those things, that's fine. There's no guilt, right? I've made these clear decisions. People ask me what I'm changing. I'll tell them what I'm changing, but there's no guilt if they do not decide to make those changes. But we forgot to do the very first story that we were going to do, which was, of course, Pope Leo the 14th. What did you guys think especially after our last Climate Courage, where we actually talked a lot about it? Yeah, what was your reaction?
Didn't know about him, which makes me one of many. He was not mentioned among the front runners when they closed the conclave. Haven't seen the movie yet, which might give me more insight on what actually goes on.
It's good.
But I can only imagine you get elected through a myriad of compromises between the various groups, because that's how politics in a closed society works. And he must have some very good political skills, or his backers might even have convinced him that he was the one that could forge a path and reach a majority. We know very little about him, apart from what's been said in the news the last 24 hours from old friends and colleagues. And he obviously spent a huge amount of time in Latin America. So his Spanish-Italian is very good for an American. I'll readily acknowledge that. He seems on the face of it to be a continuation of a more progressive Catholic Church, which probably started 2 popes ago in some respect. We don't know yet. the fact that Trump wasn't enamored and banging the American drum, as you know, probably tells you that he's not massively aligned with Trump's view of the world, and whatever that means. I think we're about to find out pretty soon the direction the church will take under his leadership. But first reaction from me would be that it seems they have decided not to deviate from the path having been laid out in the last 10, 15 years. It seems to be a church that is moving quite quickly and progressively in a direction to become a much more active part of the debate in society at large.
I'd like to, so I'm Catholic, right? So I just want to lay it out there first, because, you know, obviously there's going to be a bias and all the rest of switch off or whatever. And on Sunday, I go to Mass, so Catholic, you go to Mass. And the priest had this sort of, you know, sermon bit where I usually fade and lose the tension. But this time it was quite lucky because I arrived late, and I arrived just as he was talking about it. So I had my attention there. And he said, you know, there's a passage in the Bible where Jesus, who's the Son of God character, the main character in the New Testament kind of thing, comes along, and he asks Peter, who is kind of like the archetypal disciple, and he's the father, the first pope. You know, the church was granted to Peter to go and to look after on earth and all his kind of followers, and so this relates very much to that a lot. And Peter had, obviously, you know, the story goes, he denied Christ. He was, you know, Christ was being questioned and all the rest, and people recognized him and says, "Oh, aren't you with him?" He says, "Nah, not me, mate. Don't know who he is. I'm just here for the crowd." And he did that 3 times basically over there. And Jesus asked him, he says, you know, "Do you love me?" And he asked him 3 times, and it was always odd because you read this, he asked him 3 times, and Peter sort of said yes each time. But the priest said, actually, in the Greek words where the Bible was written in Greek in that way, there was 2 different words for love. There was kind of a brotherly love, and there was a selfless love. There's kind of an all-encompassing selfless love, as you can imagine, where you would give your life up for your child, for your children, in that way, kind of thing. Yeah. And a brotherly love, as you know, Richard and I might go for a pub and have a drink and kind of, you know, give each other a pat and a hug or whatever it was, kind of thing. I'm not sure we extend to the hug, but anyway, we'll give each other a pat, kind of love. And Jesus asked Peter, "Do you love me?" in that selfless love. And Peter says, "I love you," in the sense of, you know, I'll give you a pat on your back kind of way. And so Jesus then asked him again and says, "Do you love me?" in that selfless love. And Peter again probably thought and says, "Yeah, I can't really say yes to that, because I basically said I don't know you. You know, when push comes to shove, I walked away. So, but I do care, you know, I will go for a drink with you and all the rest. I'll even buy you a drink in that way." And then the 3rd time, Jesus asked him, "Do you love me in that brotherly way?" And he was relieved and says, "Yes, of course I do." And that essence is that message that God, the divine and whatever, comes to us. It is not some unattainable form that we somehow have to aspire, but we can never achieve because that divine is divine and we're not. But that comes to us. And so with the Pope, with this new Pope that comes along, we put all kinds of kind of politics and what does it mean and things to it. But if the Pope follows along what the teachings of the gospel and stuff, and the Pope becoming that part of kind of Peter in carrying on that tradition and that love along, is that comes to us. So in our world, which is all split and has all the difficulties and has all the uncertainties and all the unknown unknowns, we are in a new time of unknown unknowns. And we don't know if we can be that person with hope or faith or whatever, then what this election of the Pope is saying to us is comes to us. This is an American-born Peruvian kind of priest who kind of represents all manner of different things. And that's what it is. It's just that God, Jesus, comes to us. And that's what this election has created, has produced. So that's what my take.
Yeah, interesting. Heather, were you paying attention?
No, not a lot. I did. In saying that, I went to the Vatican with my partner and my children only 2 years ago when we were over there, and I can't believe it. He didn't come out and meet us.
Shocking.
He was actually there when I took the boys a few years ago, so it was amazing. So we had a couple of his people, one from Asia and one from Ireland, on the last Climate Courage, talking about the work that they're doing, or they've been doing with St. Francis. So I felt that this is an important moment, not just for the Catholic Church, but for the world, because it's a directional moment. So, and we're seeing, we saw the Romanian elections where a far-right person was elected. We've seen the mayoral elections in the UK. We've seen the Australian elections where Albanese got in, which is like cool. Not from a I'm one or the other perspective, just from a decent human beings not speaking with divisive language, talking about climate change from that perspective. So I found it was important. So just as I went to bed last night, the white smoke was released, and I'm like, oh, how long is it going to be until we see the person? And I couldn't stay awake. And then I was having all these nightmares, right, tossing and turning, and then I'm like, oh, just get on. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, just turn your phone on and go and find out who got elected. And then I saw first American Pope. I'm like, oh, no. Because, of course, the whole Opus Dei thing, right, which is really being driven out of the US. And then I'm like, I'm not going to look into this now. I'm going to get a decent amount of sleep so I can do the show today. And it wasn't until I woke up that I spent some time looking at him. And I think the ladies that we spoke to last week will be thrilled with him, the quality of the human being that he is. He's going to extend on the work that Francis has done and bring his own unique approach. And by the way, he tweets, and about a few months ago, one of his tweets was, "JD Vance is wrong." So we're going to get along okay.
That's really important. I think you bring up the other thing about the Romanian election and those things, and I want to say I watched this series. Obviously, I spent too much of my time kind of wasting it binge watching and various stuff. It's called The Capture. It's a BBC series. I watched it through Netflix. I think it's available in different countries in different ways. But what it basically is about is how it's no longer even misinformation. It's actually outright creation. It deals with sort of deep fake and other things. In a story, it's a fictional story. But I was watching it with my daughter, and I was saying, this happened, this thing is real. That happens, that thing is real. This happens, this thing is real. It's just put together in different ways. And the way in which elections now, you almost feel like what you really do need to do is do what they did in the conclave, which is for yourself. Just close yourself off from all the rest of the stuff. Block it all out. Don't even go along to it. Find out where your core is, where your center is. Let that then guide you about what you want to do, because all of that other stuff is crafted, designed to trigger you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The 5 people that we hang with is who we become, so we better choose wisely.
Yeah, but I do feel like it was like I don't know. It kind of feels like we're kind of heading in a direction as a global society that just it's such a self-destructive direction. So it felt like, for me, this papal conclave felt important just from to keep a little bit of hope sitting out there for me, right? That there's this organisation that is really capable of doing so much incredibly great work, and has a positive influence with politicians around the world. So, it felt good. And the fact that he's such because he speaks Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and obviously English, right? So, but having a pope that's first language English, that's the first time ever, I think.
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of handy at the moment when you look around. So yeah, it felt like a big moment. But anyway, Richard, do you want to share some good news this week?
Oh, I'm always,
the one on the list. Have you got it?
Yes, I have got it in front of me. I think we should go to Agents of Change and Agents of Evolution. It's actually a really good story that Andrea found. And it ties in nicely with this wildebeest thinking that is very ingrained with David. There is that sense that you need to keep on evolving at all times. And it goes back to kind of the Darwinian thinking. It's not the strongest, it's not the fastest that actually prevails. It's the one that can adapt to the environment that you're in. And it's quite a positive story, I have to say. It's showing some significant scientific proof that we're actually are adapting in areas. And I think it's a nice story. It gives me hope that actually it's not all doom and gloom, which is very easy to end up with. And I like that a lot, I have to say. Well found. I think it's called Embodied Evolution Defined. And it talks about these evolutionary agents. It's a really great story. And
right. I wasn't sure which one you were talking about. Yep, got you now.
Okay, no, it basically talks about the sort of the impulse that has been driving us for billions of years. It's what drives survival on this planet, and it left me with a huge amount of hope, I have to say. So a great positive story to talk in all the negativity that hits us in the press normally, because we have a slight negative tilt, it has to be said.
Yeah, it's hard not to, right, when the stuff we're talking about. So the other positive story, of course, is pangolins.
Pangolins, another good story.
Yeah. So in Singapore, there are pangolins in the forest here. Did you know that?
Did not know that.
Yeah, it's a modern city and there's pangolins, right? So China has announced that it is removing, I'm going to try and say it, guilingji, which is traditional Chinese medicine. And I found this really interesting. So basically they're moving it from their official pharmacopoeia. So that's like essential sort of repository approval Chinese medicine, I'm presuming, to align with wildlife protection. But at the same time, on Netflix, there's this new series called Kulu, the Pangolin's Journey, and it's a South African documentary which is absolutely wiping the floor with its ratings. So I need to watch that. But basically, pangolins are hunted for their scales because they're believed to have healing properties, and the meat is considered a delicacy in some Asian societies. But they're just up. They can't run away, right? But the guilingji is a medicine that includes red ginseng, deer antler, seahorse, and pangolin. Now, seahorses are my favorite sea creature, so I couldn't believe when I saw seahorses also in this medicine. But anyway, so I mean, it's a positive thing. So I think that when I look at some of the biggest issues, like the ocean, the fishing, a lot of the medicines, so the hunting, rhinos, fast fashion, sustainable energy, electric vehicles, I think China is the answer to a lot of our problems. And it's a country where the government can act at scale and say, we can't do this anymore, guys. And right now, in the trade wars that are going on around the world, especially with the US, Cheyenne was obviously hoping on a different outcome with Trump. And they haven't got it. But if there's a way that this could kill the fast fashion industry, because we've got enough clothes on the planet to clothe the next 6 generations of humans yet to be born already on the planet, right? It's out of control. We need to do something. David?
I think just on this thing about kind of the good news and stuff. I read something this morning. I just want to bring it up. It's a I'm trying to think what was the article, where it was. It was in one of these sort of energy press kind of thing, energy industry press type thing. Mm-hmm. So, and he was saying, he was talking from a U.S. energy producer, and basically says, oil prices at the moment makes it impossible for. It was talking about his own company. It was saying, we're not going to increase production. It's just ridiculous because we'll make a loss out of it. What we're going to do is we're going to use the money to pay back debt and buy back shares, basically. Because what Trump has done with the drill baby drill is made it impossible for us to continue. Mm. And I think that's kind of an interesting element to add into this. Now, obviously, OPEC Plus is increasing their production and trying to take their share. And this is an element to remember. The reason the US drills is very commercial. They want to make money out of it. The reason Saudi drills is because they got to fund their whole government. The reason why Senegal has opened up a new natural gas field and has just begun production is because they need the money for all their various actions, including all the climate stuff and everything. So the motivations are all very different along different places. But as far as the US, which is the world's biggest producer, is concerned, it's all commercial. And what Trump has done has made the commerciality fair. And that's the same as Shein, as Andrea is talking about. That business relies on the fact that small packages can get through customs without any tax. And that's going to stop now, because as soon as the US stop it, other places are going to stop it too. It's going to go along. So again, the part about what your action and what you do, you have to look at the opportunities. You have to look and see what's there, and then actually, from your core, from your center, kind of take actions because you're driven by something that you believe in, that you want to move forward with. That's how you can actually manage and navigate through what's going on. So, in that way, kind of the one thing I find that's well, there's two things I'd like to bring up in there. One is sort of the blackouts we're having and what that means. And the other is the conflict in India, Pakistan. Mm. And the blackout, Bali went dark, basically, kind of the whole place. And tourists is like, oh my God, I come here to have a good time. You've gone dark on me. How do I go out and have a great time, right? So that's one part. And the other part is Spain lost its complete power across the whole country, and good chunk of Portugal as well. And that's like, oh my God, what do I do? You see all the news about a panic and everything. And how should you really see that? After all, that's what we want to be talking about. How do you really see the world? How do you look through the tea leaves? You're in Bali, it goes dark, look up and see the beautiful sky,
Although, David, it was actually, so Spain and Portugal, when it went down, it wasn't in the middle of summer when they were going through an extreme heat event. Bali's in the middle of an extreme heat event, and they 8 to 12 hours, maybe even longer, before the air conditioning's back on. For a white person on holiday who's not used to extreme heat and has no time to adjust to extreme heat, that's actually a really dangerous place to put themselves in.
Well, that then goes down to this thing, is that all of these are like practices for us, for a world that we're going into. And yes, it is. But the wrong part of it is then to somehow think that you should fix it so I can keep coming. The practice that this is actually teaching you is either discover how to stay cool. And I'm always reminded of my mum. When I was young in Hong Kong, I was in a tram in Hong Kong, really hot, humidity up in the 90s kind of thing, right? So you're like hot, humid, you're a young child, and you're fidgeting like crazy to try and cool. And my mum sort of looks at me and says, you know, when you can stay calm in your heart, you will be cool. When you can calm your heart, you will be cool. And that's the thing for all these tourists, okay? You got to learn about how you can stay cool. And physically, mentally, all of those things together. And it's holistic, it's all connected. Because if you fret about, you spend your body fretting about, your mind can never be calm. And
although David, I think it's important, like, because I had to learn how to be cool in Asia. But Phuket just last week, the wet bulb temperature was 52 degrees Celsius. So you can't survive in heat like that if you don't get access to cool. And that's not about keeping anything calm. It's about you're going to die of heat stroke if you don't get yourself to a cool place.
But that's the point. That's the point of the practice, right? You know, you are going to go along in that way. So if you're going to rely on, and this goes to the other part, if you're going to somehow rely on perfection to be the way that you survive, and you never thrive, because that perfection is never going to come. And this is the point. We look at these things and people offer those arguments. Those arguments are trying to tease you into saying, how do we make it perfect? The answer
I don't understand.
So you go along and you say, of course, we've got to do something about that, people won't. But the reality is more and more places around the world will see power failures in times of extreme heat and extreme temperature. And it will come to you. You're going to see it. So if you see it there in Bali, what are you going to do to prepare yourself for what that means for you? And if your idea of preparing yourself is to rely on the fact that somehow you live in a rich country whose system is perfect, then look at Spain.
Yeah.
You are going to find all these things will trickle off through. So what are your different ways by which you can actually move? If you only have one path, and if you only rely on someone else to maintain that path for you, you're going to find you will be entirely stuck. You won't be able to manage it. You need to discover for yourself, and you need to start now what it means for you to thrive. You know, what are the things around you that you want? How do you create the pool places, the streams of income, the ways that you can actually have that robustness in your mind to keep going? What ultimately drives you? Because that thing that ultimately drives you is the thing that would take you towards how you can thrive. And if what ultimately drives you is to go on a holiday in Bali, then you've got to really start asking about your comfort zones. Because that's a terrible comfort zone to have. And that's the part about this. That's how you turn this along. And it's unfortunate because it's a really hard lesson. It's a really harsh lesson. It's great, you know, Heather has been talking about her journey. Because her journey is a reflection of all of our journeys in different forms. That's why it's a bestseller, because it so captures our own journeys in that way. But the essence of that is you have to take the steps. You have to start somewhere.
Yeah, I'm just not sure I'm understanding, but I want you to. I'm not sure I'm understanding the point you're making here, because I think there's different points in this, right? Because I think we've got to communicate the seriousness. I'm there was a female just found dead on the beach in Phuket a few weeks ago because she overheated. She didn't know that was a dangerous thing for her to do, to lie on the beach all day, and she just died, and they found her a few hours later, right? So to me, it's about like we've moved into dangerous. So India and Pakistan have been up just on the verge of 50 for the last few weeks, months before it usually gets anywhere near that, right? The Middle East, the stands, the heat waves are crazy. I know Europe, the UK is having one at the moment too, right?
Yeah.
so to me, it's we're moving into deadly territory in large bands of the world. We need to be aware of what that is. People don't even know what a wet bulb temperature is when I talk about it. It's so humid here at the moment, you wouldn't believe it. So we don't get the really, really high heat that you get north of us and south of us, but we get the really, really high humidity, which you remember as a child in Hong Kong, David, right? So we're in a hot phase right now. And it's disgusting. You go out, it's just disgusting, right? So you just don't go out. But so do you understand? So wait.
What I'm saying is absolutely right. So I think there's there's knowledge, which is the knowledge of what what a wet bulb temperature means. The temperature that is kind of at where your sweat doesn't have any effect, effectively, basically. You
stop sweating.
Basically, that's the wet bulb temperature. It's just devastating because your way in which you cool. As you're a dog, you can go panting and go and try to, kind of get cooler that way. But it's not. Even that doesn't do anything because it's so saturated with moisture in the air. So that's the knowledge you have. The understanding is that it kills you. The lady on the beach who was found dead. That's the understanding along. And then you need something to actually say, what can I do? What guides me along? And that's an element of that wisdom, what I call wisdom. Knowing who you are and what action that makes sense to you, that helps you to move forward with. And what I'm saying is that wisdom cannot rely on somehow someone else making things perfect for you. It won't. We are past the point of no return. These devastating things, the knowledge of these things and the understanding of what it means is the reality we're going to. So to the comment that Heather was talking about, if there was sufficient notice, we would have hay out there. Maybe we need to start thinking about what is our hay and what that needs to be.
Totally.
For ourselves. That's the action we now need to start doing, because what these things are telling us is that we are past that point that we could somehow preempt it and it won't happen.
Yeah. And know it's specifically for you, and every single disaster, people need cash.
Yes.
Number one. Every single time. It's the first thing that goes down to the banks.
That's
every
what
time.
happened in Spain.
Yeah.
People end up with nothing there. But the other side of that, the more societal side of that, is if someone comes to you without cash in something like this, will you still give them a glass of water or a piece of bread or whatever? Because if
the community's strong, right?
Yeah.
If you rely on money to be the source of how things get distributed, their prices will go crazy.
What they're doing in Australia to try and eliminate power outages and things like that is offering incentives for people to do solar, because we get so much sun out here.
Yeah.
So that is a way of eliminating that problem. So we've only just, literally last week, got solar panels put on the roof, so we won't have to experience that, because we are in a really hot area. It gets up to 50 degrees out here, not usually for too many weeks, but our summer is December, January is the hottest months. And so if we've overridden that, if possible power outage by our solar is going to kick in, we're all good to go. We're going to stay cool. Well, that's going to fix that problem. So anywhere that's got enough sunlight, that's how they can do it. And if their governments will put these, initiatives into place.
There's also a lot of farmers in Australia, especially with I heard it with sheep. They're putting solar panels in their fields high enough so that the sheep can go underneath them. But the morning dew is creating moisture, which means that there's grasses growing under the panels. So there's food for the sheep to eat. The farmers are getting money from the energy created from the solar panels, and everyone's winning. Are you seeing that around where you are as well?
No, the closest is near Dubbo, so about 4.5 hours drive. It's this side of Dubbo. and they're actually got them fairly low to the ground, and they don't put livestock in there. I'm like, that's just crazy. If they're using Roundup or weed spray to kill the grass, and there's massive fields that were really good grazing country or farming country, it is in a cropping area, that have now been taken up with solar panels. And I'm like, what the hell? There's plenty of factory roofs they could have put them on instead. That's already a space that's not being used.
Richard and I were talking about how, they get so much warm, the panels. It'd be great to grow grapes.
Yeah. I mean, there's some stories from Australia where they put them high enough, and there's all this moisture from the heat and the morning dew. And so, there's some really cool stories coming out about it. Definitely.
I think those are exactly, the part of what Heather's talking about, right? There's you have to keep looking and thinking, what can you do with what you have around you? If you stay in your comfort zone and say, I got a solar panel, okay, it's 2 feet off the ground, you just leave it there in that way. You're not really looking and then say, actually, there is space underneath it. Maybe, I can have my sheep graze underneath it.
Exactly. Put them on roofs.
Yeah, or put them on roofs, because then it actually helps as an insulation to the roof.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. The heat is if it works, it has to take some of the heat energy out of the sun shining on it, so it's got to keep the area a little bit better than if it didn't have it. So
and independence from the grid's really important, right?
It's super important, and it will be a very, very large part of the future. So certainly both myself and David believe that, because if you just do the maths and the energy demand we're seeing, we don't have the ability to rip out and reconfigure a central grid. It cannot happen. Then you have like Spain's situation times 1,000.
Yeah.
If the demand keeps on increasing, the only way you are going to be able to, in some form, meet that needs to be decentralized. You're going to have small hubs. And if you have 64,000 acres, then that's your hub. But for villages, it will probably be one wind tower.
Well, you might,
I think, solar panels.
Even on an individual household level.
Yes.
I what we're largely talking about is kind of like, you have 10. I reckon if you had something like 10% of your energy, if you're in a developed world, especially in somewhere like a city and so on, it actually provides for your fundamental needs. If you actually thought about it, all the other stuff is what we kind of fill up. It's like what you talked about, 6 times more clothes than we will ever wear, kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
It's the same with the energy, it's the same with all of that stuff that we have along. So if you have that, if you can have that, and that's a panel on your roof, a bit of a wind turbine thing. You have these, if you see on roof chimneys, I don't know if you see these silver little balls that goes spinning around. And it's because it draws the heat out and spins it and distributes it. That works in reverse or works in that way to create electricity. You can do that.
Yeah.
And the ball itself is so light it isn't enough. But you can use it as you would do in a merry-go-round, where you're standing on the side, the kid's on it, and you can give it a little shove every time and it speeds up along. So you can actually use it to spin a flywheel and just keep adding little bits of energy in it until it's got enough along to really give you some power out of it. You can do all those things. All that is kind of, I spent a decade as a physicist, right? So that's where that comes from. So all of that are things that we can actually do, which essentially provide us with the energy that we would need for most of the things that are essential to us, including how to cool ourselves. And in cooling ourselves, again, nobody talks of heat chimneys. You have something outside which is, say, dark colored, connected to inside, that will draw air through, and it will draw air through you. When you have airflow, you have the ability to cool air. When air goes through expands along, it gets cool. So you can actually go along and devise a heat chimney where the south side ends up drawing it, the north side or the shaded side ends up going on through. And if you don't have a shaded side, you can create shades. You can actually put up, grow bamboo or whatever it is, or if you're in somewhere where it's hard to grow along, you can actually think about, creating the nettings and things so that you can do that. And that,
there's
what
some amazing traditional things, right?
Yeah.
So they create what I call nanoclimate. Not even microclimate, they're kind of nanoclimate.
Yeah.
So Joe's just, I missed it. Sorry, Joe. Politically, the American Pope has a better chance of influencing the way the world would lean. In some ways, he outranks the US Supreme Court, which I think is fine. But I do, I think it really matters. I do. I absolutely do. But you're right, David. Like some of the traditional technology, the cooling infrastructure, the regions like Asia, the Middle East, I don't know if it's going to work as well as the temperatures are getting beyond 50. But we're not, we're not doing any.
The thing is, there's a difference, right? Between there's an economic difference. The kind of thing I'm talking about are terrible in the big money world because people can do it themselves.
Yeah.
So they don't make money. So you never see those things proposed and you never see them on the shelves. And they find that every time someone talks about it, they're going to be knocked down as saying, you can't scale and all those things with it. Scaling essentially means getting more people to pay me for what I want them to use. That's what it means, basically. It's not about getting more people to thrive in their own way, wherever they are. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is that our schools no longer teach science in the way that science was discovered. Science was always practical. It's like this comment made about sustainability kind of thing. You can't do it on a desk. You got to be out there to see where the animals are actually getting their water to do that. And that kind of practical approach where you experiment, you discover as you go along, is something which more and more of our formalized education is educating people away from.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The problem is the textbooks are all written before the world is changing.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, Heather, you had that real life education, right?
Yeah.
With the creatures in the bush.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. But Richard, what was your first point? I was just thinking from a capitalist perspective, Richard, what do you think of that first point? Well, it was about if you can't sell it at scale, no one's going to make it, right?
No,
because you're talking about those chimney things. So that's an industrial solution, but I've never seen it for a house. And it's so just so you know, Heather, it's basically, rather than having solar panels, say you're in a place that was going to get a lot of hailstorms, you're not going to want to have solar panels because you have to replace them all the time. But there's these little chimneys which they spin around and they capture energy and you pump them down into a battery.
I've seen them on factory roofs and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. But they should be on the homes too.
And
to me, it should be simple.
You shouldn't just rely on one thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you want to be robust to what may happen, you want to know that, even when it gets dark, you're okay, or other things, you're okay. And you shouldn't just rely on one thing. But the commercial world is always going to sell you one thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, that's the problem, right?
Because it makes you dependent on them. And by making you dependent on them, they make more money.
Yeah. Yeah. Or also continuing to exacerbate the problem. So,
which makes you more depend on them even more, which is fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. So, so that's where we are, right? And Richard, because, you're a champion of capitalism.
I love capitalism.
Yeah. But you also understand that it's a problem, right?
It's a huge problem because we have corrupted capitalism as it was intended. We haven't actually understood, in an almost religious meaning, the true meaning of capitalism and the true power of capitalism, how it actually can massively enrich in our lives because it's the only system that actually works. But we have corrupted it. and bastardized it and turned it into a creature nowadays, which is basically, how can I be better off than others? And that's not what ever was intended, and certainly not what Adam Smith was advocating once upon a time. It's a very different. But tying it all back, I think we should go back to all the stories you dug out here, because it really ties in.
I want you to help people understand, because you advocate for capitalism. I think it's important.
Yes.
What does it mean in its truest sense of the word? And can we live in a world that's sustainable with capitalism?
Absolutely.
Right.
I would argue, I would be so bold that I would argue that only capitalism can bring about a sustainable world. But we need to factor in all the bits. And at the moment, we're kind of bastardizing capitalism into making it pay for me now. And I don't really care about the future because it has no value. Any banker who sits down with you will tell you that you can pay off the farming equipment in 10 years. You can fertilize this much more, and your crop yield will be this much higher. And in 10 years, you paid off the whole investment. Yeah, but in year 12, the soil will be worthless because I've absolutely ruined it. Yeah, but that doesn't factor into the model. That's not capitalism. True capitalism takes into account what happens forever, factoring in all the costs. And I think, quite some time ago, David and I, we had a discussion, can't remember who it was with the well. And I think you used the analogy of the well. You're in a very arid area, not desert, but stuff is really struggling to grow. But you have the one well. Now, the way capitalism works is, I'm going to feed my donkey to bring the water up from the well, and I want to make some money. So I factor in the cost of what the donkey costs me, and some refurbishment of the well every now and then when the bucket gets, too old to be used. And then I put a margin on top, and I see where the market kind of is for a bucket of water in this very arid area. And that's where the price is. All of a sudden, the well is empty. What is the price of the last bucket of water? Now, capitalism in its current form hasn't factored this in, because actually the first bucket should have been priced along the model that the water will run out. And then we would not have grown, flowers. We would have focused on growing crops, because that would actually have been beneficial to the overall model. And too much of what we see today, and what David is talking about scale, is all about how can it benefit me and how many can I sell. A true capitalist solution takes into account the whole.
Yeah.
And the whole at the moment is probably, it's a great idea for you to have a heat chimney. It's a great idea for you to have solar panels disconnected from the central grid. And all these shapes and forms, it's probably a great idea for you to grow some crops where you live, so you have some extra food supply. And if you're in an apartment, you probably need to grow them on your balcony or your windowsill or even indoors. David's also a great champion for growing stuff indoors. I haven't quite reached there yet, but I'm trying to grow things. And when we talk about protecting yourself from heat, it's all these really basic old solutions. Like, I'm trying to encourage more plants to come up my walls, because I know it will insulate the house when the sun hits it. And if you look at what's being sold, it's like, we can put some cladding on. Yeah, because that I can scale and sell to 100,000 houses. It's like, just plant a climbing vegetable on next to your house, and it will cover your wall. And it will do the job of protecting you from the direct sunlight. And it will cool your house when we don't have 50, but 3 years ago we had 40 here. And it's, for most people, it's unbearable. I'm very, very fortunate. I live in an old house. So it wasn't that hot, but it got warm. And here, no one has aircon, and you shouldn't need aircon. We live in the UK. It's ridiculous.
I'd like to add that, and again, the comment here from John Augustine, I think, is relevant along the
Absolutely
says capitalism only works when sustainability becomes part of the demand side of the equation. It only works, that is, people need to demand sustainability rather than demand goods. Which makes it very different, because then what you do is you satisfy the demand of sustainability rather than you satisfy the demand for goods. It only works when all the costs are costs and the price isn't subsidized. And I have this thing where I'm, this thing which I think people find very difficult to in some ways to describe, but maybe I found a better way to describe it. Supposing you know someone who has the Mona Lisa, okay, the French government at the moment, but supposing someone has it, and you actually value it a lot, and you know they're going to destroy it for whatever reason. Okay, so you go along and you say to them, look, what do you want to do with it? And they say, well, we want to, I need such and such, or whatever it is. And it says, well, why don't we join together and we invest in getting what you need in that way? So, but for your part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of ask you to not to destroy it, but to we're going to create a fund to create all these businesses which can give you what you need. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, put in the Mona Lisa, don't destroy it, and I'll invest money along, and we'll kind of show the Mona Lisa around to tell people what we're doing as a way to attract them, inspire them to what we're doing, and get them also to contribute, maybe, become partners of this thing altogether. So now that makes sense to people, and they think you can do that, and that's great. When you put into the fund manager is going to look at this, and it's not going to go along and say, scrape the paint off it and burn it. It's going to go along and says, how can I use it to inspire people into what I'm doing? We can use nature in that same way too, but we don't. We think of cutting it up and chopping it and destroying it as the way to do it. We measure it in what Richard is talking about in terms of what we can get out of the water from the well in what we use, rather than saying, what do we think of a landscape that has water above, water below? How can it inspire us to think how else we can do without having to keep doing it, so we're left with nothing left in that way? So capitalism in the current way is essentially selling our family, kind of heirlooms, which is nature, for the pennies we get, and hoping that somehow that will be okay. To put it the other way around, you have to go along and say family heirlooms are there to inspire us with the history of kind of our family, where we've come from, the trilogy that Heather's written. Kind of like, the first print of that is a family heirloom. It's never to be sold, it's to be read in that way. So those are kind of, how do you rethink capitalism? How do you redefine and reimagine capitalism? Because what capitalism does not describe is the fact that it allows people to transact in a way to say, how can I serve you so that you can better yourself? That's the heart of capitalism. What is transferred into is, how can I get your money so I can better me?
Yeah, and it's sort of everyone talks about the system of extraction.
Yes.
Well, we create products and services, but the other side, of course, is waste, right? So being married to an engineer and understanding, the most unbelievable. Sorry, I'll take you off, David. So you don't have to sit there. Like a chemical waste product with the pH level off the charts, and working out a way to put it into the earth so that it doesn't go into the environment. But there's a time limit on that. So eventually the safe structure to keep it contained will break down, and that chemical will go into the environment. But there's no obligation on the company that put it in the ground beyond that 5-year agreement, right? So our waste, the businesses have no responsibility for the waste. From fast fashion, basically every single thing we buy, there is no waste responsibility at the corporate level. Everything.
No, and a true capitalist like me would argue that that is the essence of the flawed model. That because in a true capitalist sense, you should have unlimited forever product responsibility to capture the true cost, but the future has no value. Hence, I can do this and get away with it and assume that the externality of whatever is paying that price. And for me, that is the corruption.
Yeah, right. But the fiduciary responsibility of a business that's looking forward with no responsibility for the waste is destroying the possibility of their business in the future, because they're not going to be able to create whatever they want to create because of the waste that's in the environment, that's poisoning the environment, right? So
of course,
it's just illogical to me.
But by then I have retired, right? And I've got my stock options.
Well, there's various things that came up this week about that. That's quite interesting. And also, I mean, Andrea pointed out this part about, DuPont.
Yep.
And the legacy it leaves behind, kind of as a chemical industry that basically created littered the world with horrendous chemicals.
3M as well.
And I think there is a part that we have to. There are three parts to this. The first part is that, one of the sort of chemicals it created, this PTFE type Teflon type things, which no longer used along in that way, and absolutely horrendous in this sense, in terms of disposing as waste, is that it itself was to deal with what do you do with oil and all the dredges out of it after you've extracted out the bit that you can burn, and that became the chemical industry. So we deal with waste in thinking if we can use waste in some helpful way, then we can reduce our waste. But what it does is it litters it with other kind of consequences. And it's really worth remembering that. Again, in this world where I spend too much time watching, I think there's a Netflix film called Dark Waters, I think.
Yes.
Or something like that, which is about DuPont and the PFE thing.
It's very good.
I'll watch it.
There's a book about Merchants of Death on those things. But I think in those ways, it talks about how it starts almost like they're agents in that way to go forward. But in many respects, they were cleaning up what was left of oil. So each cleanup has other consequences along that we have.
Yeah.
And the other part is this week, Chevron finally lost a lawsuit on not cleaning up a bit of land that it messed up, basically. And it got fined $740-something million as a result of this. The point is, this took 12 years. The CEO at the time retired in 2018. To Richard's point there. And the other part is, even if you fine it $100 billion $745 million, Chevron's profit last year was $17 billion. So even it doesn't even count as a chip on 1 year's kind of profit in that way, let alone over 12. But then again, even if you bankrupted the company, say you fined it $1 trillion, it doesn't change the fact that it was already done.
Yeah.
And what happens is businesses cost their liabilities. So it goes along and says, sure, we get sued for this, we may lose the law case, it'll cost so much and over such a time. We just sell the product for that a little bit higher. And that's the part. Remember a few weeks back, we had some people talking about marketing, and the comment was made along the way about how marketing kind of drives the world.
Yeah.
So if we open ourselves, we are always going to be enticed along that way. So we kind of it's a circle. It's not something that you can somehow fix in one form or another. You do have to have some kind of trust, as Heather would say, or faith, as I would describe, in what you do. So you can't be guided. You can't always just be taken down the traps of trying to say why this would work or that would work. You need to free yourself to say, I realize it's not perfect. How do I still make my step?
Yeah, I think that's it. The thing that I'm just constantly sitting here going, when are we going to wake up? Is we know all this has happened. That DuPont article. So there's an article, I think it's in the Atlantic, which how did we get where we are from a synthetics perspective? And of course, the first consumer synthetics was nylon stockings, which went crazy. We went crazy for. And you'd buy a pair of stockings in World War II that would last you for years. Now, if you can get them on your foot without ripping them, you don't buy one pair of stockings, you have to buy 5. And you have to be so careful about getting them on. And it's the best thing about living in the tropics is you never wear them. And Heather, I'm sure you don't wear stockings very often either.
Nah.
but you got to spend a lot of money to get the quality,
Not
Richard,
that practical farming, I suspect.
No, not real practical. It's good if you're horse riding and it stops the chafe. You can put them on under your jeans. That's about it. There's practical sides to stockings.
Yeah.
Bloody hot though.
Yeah, I can imagine. But just I think we all just need to sort of step back and say, okay, we got a lot of stuff wrong. Let's just come to, like all industries. Let's just come together and get it right. But we, the consumer, have to just stop demanding cheap. We need higher quality products that last for longer. That's not going to bring great share return value, right? It's a real revolution, and I think we're not even willing to face up to the conversation we need to have. The marketing conversation was fantastic. Like the world that is presented to me on social media is in complete opposition to the world that I know that needs to be presented to me. And most people aren't thinking about stuff I'm thinking about. Mother's Day. Mate, Mother's Day is coming up next week. Is it Mother's Day for you as well in
Sunday.
the UK or Sunday in Australia? Is it in the UK or is that November in the UK?
Yeah.
UK said the Mother's Day.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So Mother's Day is coming up, right? Every single airline's marketing to me. I've already said I'm trying not to fly unless I absolutely have to. Products. I don't buy anything. I don't want anything. If I need it, I get it, but otherwise I don't buy anything. So, this world is being marketed to me that's not in alignment with who I am in the world. Sorry.
No, but
well,
again, it goes back to almost how we started today, right? What is the fair price? What are your priorities? With a certain amount of wisdom, pushing 60, I spend decent amount of money, certainly for a bloke, when I buy shoes, because it's a well-being thing. If my feet are comfortable, I'm going to feel good, and they last me forever. I still have shoes from the time I started in the business in 1990. Sure, they've been repaired a few times and resold and everything else, but actually they were probably in relative terms more expensive back then, but they're a really great product. They suit my feet, which are tricky, and I feel good in them, and I repair them because it will be very hard to find similar shoes again. I don't see the point of having 5 business shoes. They're all black, and I don't use them very often anymore, but I want 2 so I could alternate, and I still have 2. And then I have a pair of brown ones for Funky Friday. But it's that mindset that I've never kind of gotten to, that I need to have 5 shirts of different kinds. It's like, you're only going to wear them twice. A shirt doesn't, like shoes, last forever, but a good shirt actually does last you a long time. It will go through many washes without losing its shape. And for me, that is, I'm prepared to spend more because I want a product with certain qualities. And it comes the same way with food. I want to know that it has certain properties, and I want to know that the farmer who produced it actually can earn a decent living and can continue. And I think this is really, really important. It's about the relationship, right? If I know that the farm will be around next year and 10 years from now, it gives me the security and the safety of saying, you know what, I will find food. Because we're going into the world that we talked about today, where this will become a very different outlook. And then I should, as an insurance, be prepared to pay more to have the certainty or near certainty that the person who produced this will go on producing it and will not close down because they can't find the economics. And then God knows where I'm going to find my food, because whatever little I'm growing here in my garden is not going to be enough. And you should be prepared to pay a fair price. That is, for me, part of the whole equation. And actually, it's very capitalist.
Yeah.
Our food's practically organic out here. We don't even have fruit flies because it's a dry area. So I grow a lot of mangoes and all kinds of things in my garden. I've got all this beautiful fruit that doesn't have any chemicals on it. And with our livestock, is very little chemical as well. Like, it's only sheep producers that have to backline for lice once a year. And worms, if there's a good season, then perhaps once a year. So it's basically organic.
Yeah.
I think
chemical free. And stress-free as well, because they've had such a lovely life.
Yes. I like
so
that.
It's like Wagyu sheep.
And goats. We have goats out here as well, so a lot of goats.
Nice.
I think there's this thing about the storytelling at the moment, the narrative at the moment about how we make our choice or whatever it is and so on, and what we need to do. I see it as, this is still, we're still missing the fact that we won't have that choice. The world is going to be a lot harder. It's just, Heather's kind of life experience in many ways. My mum had started with a tough life. One of her most kind of poignant story, which she told laughing kind of thing, when she was young and the Second World War. She goes out trying to get bread. I think her father or whatever had been in the gold rush and had managed to come back wealthy, but they lost it all when the Japanese invaded, and they moved out of their places and ended up being destitute in many respects. And she was going out with her brother to try and find bread, and he, bomb exploded, he lost his leg, and that was kind of, the introduction to life type thing, right? Whatever we think in terms of our choices, the choice is not really going to be there around. It's really going to be a case of what do you actually need for you to thrive. So it's not, the thing you got to think about is not how do I go along and do with only 3 shoes. The fact is you are only going to have 3 shoes. But what are you going to do with those shoes is what matters. Not which shoes are you going to have, but what are you going to do with them? How does that help you thrive along? And we still don't get that, because when we start to talk in those ways, we are taking ourselves from the advertising of buy these shoes and buy those shoes. We're actually moving it back into our own space. What am I going to do with those shoes? How is that actually going to help me achieve that core that I want to be? The parent I want to be, that's better than my parents to me. The person I am, that's better than the capitalist I am, that's better than the capitalism that I see. In that way. And
I was just thinking we've gone past our deadline, so we should wrap it up. We had so many other news stories. I mean, those of us in Asia in particular are very nervous about the situation in India and Pakistan. I hope it calms down. That's always been one of the red alerts in the world for not good. The UK farmers are really screaming now about food security in the UK. So food security is becoming an issue all around the world, countries right across the world. All staples are diminishing. I think the average is 5.6% per year diminishing in the staples, which might not sound like much, but it's going to add up. And when we talk about the cost of living crisis, it's going to keep going up. So a lot of stuff going on. We're paying attention to it all the time, trying to make sense of it. We're not giving you hope, but hopefully we're giving you the idea that it's time to just really, really sort of harness in, the amount of, I always say we need to reduce our energy and material consumption by about 70%, give or take, if we come from a wealthy background, and focus on your community and building resilience. But Heather, thank you so much for joining us. You're our first Outback guest.
Thank
Wow.
you. Yeah, you're so welcome. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brilliant to have you here, and
Thank you.
blown away by your life story and your lifestyle.
Yeah.
And just to let you know, I have messaged my daughter. I hope she gets an opportunity to give it a go, to get out to you.
No, that'd be nice.
Fabulous. I certainly hope so. That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Be really
I'll
good.
definitely come.
Good.
I want to
Looking
listen to
forward
the
it.
local radio station too. That would
Tune
be
in on Wednesday morning, 2WEB Outback Radio, 5:85 a.m. That's
oh
that's
God,
where
no,
you'll
I
find me.
can't. No, that's too early in the morning. That's like 2 a.m. for me or something. But anyway, yeah, it's really great.
Oh
to have you here.
no. The station is called 5:85 a.m. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I don't go in till 8 o'clock. I'm there on from between 8 till 12. Yeah, I
Nice.
co-host with another guy. Yeah,
Cool. Awesome.
yeah. Bring people in and interview them, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Well, we've enjoyed interviewing you today. All right,
Absolutely.
everyone.
Thank you. Much
Good to see
appreciated.
everyone.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
See you in a couple
Have
of
a
weeks.
fabulous
Bye.
weekend. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.